Welcome to One Bad Podcast. Here's your hosts, KD and Shaner.
So KD, we came full circle on the podcast talking about the American tour that we did. I'm sure there's like a million stories that we're probably forgetting, but whatever. When this podcast wraps up, if we have enough that we forgot about, we might have to do some bonus episodes. But
the B-sides.
Yeah, I mean, hey, every great album's got them. They're some of my favorite tunes, you know.
Yeah.
But you know what? This is to go from here because obviously between that tour and the new EP coming out here just this year, we had a full pandemic, and before the pandemic even hit, I don't know about you, but like after that Sebastian Bach tour, I came home and I never felt that exhausted. Like I got really sick. I remember that. Like it was almost like my body, my brain just was like shutting down. It was almost like I felt, and I don't know how you felt, but like we pushed so hard. It was almost as though like my body like hit like a shut off, which was like, if you're not going to stop for a little bit, we're going to make you, that was kind of the feeling I had. So I got super sick. I was laid up for weeks. And it was just kind of like a forced, like, okay, like this life, like being a musician, being a touring musician can really take a toll on you, and you've said in a few podcasts ago, like, luckily we didn't get involved in like drugs and booze. Like no one struggled with addiction, like thankfully in this band, because there's a reason why that happens, obviously, is like, it is just such a grind. And so I do remember after that tour just being like, just exhausted, from not just the tour, but what felt like, you'd also said how we'd always been working hard, but when the Red album came out, like from like the beginning of that album coming out to the Sebastian Bach tour, it was nonstop. It was just foot on the gas and no breaks at all, so I think it was just like a general exhaustion. But how did you feel, man?
Yeah, similar, man. And it's sort of that exhaustion combined with a sense of like, where the hell are we gonna go from here? Like we put it all into that last record, got a #1 song, and it didn't really it didn't move the dial that much, right? In terms of, we thought like you said earlier, we'd given the label and our management and our agents everything they asked for. They said, get a #1 song, which that's a pretty effing tall order, like not many bands can go do it. We did it, and it didn't change things much, right? I mean, again, I don't want to bore people with like the financial side of the music biz, but like, it's like we were busting our asses on the road like 8 months of the year sometimes or more.
Yep.
9 months some years, and making like F all for money, right? Which that only matters insofar as like what it can do for your life in terms of making it easier, right? Like our lives we were grinding every month to like pay rent, to pay for groceries, like the boring stuff in life. But I think people, it was just like we had a #1 song, toured like crazy, toured the U.S., and it's like we don't have a lot to show for it, right? And it wasn't like our team was.
Well, it wasn't even, I was gonna say, like, you make a good point, man, because it isn't just about like, oh, we're gonna do this and get rich, but it was like it was still not even sustainable. Like it wasn't like you had this reliable, somewhat sustainable income coming in. It was still, feast or famine. The feast was a little bigger at points now than it had been, but it's still like once the tap shuts off and it's just like, okay, well, let's record again and go back to it. Like, you're right. Like it just totally, like, you hate to talk so much about financial stuff, but I mean, who else has a career where they're like just not going to worry about whether or not they can make rent? Like it's not realistic, and not just rent, but everything else in life. So yeah.
And it wasn't like I think also it'd be different if our team was like, and again, I think that there's probably some teams of bands that did a better job of like planning and whatever, but like if they had said, okay, here's what we're planning for the next record in terms of, like make a growth plan, or be like, here's what you guys, maybe in a couple of years you can afford to put a down payment on a house. Like none of that. Like we were nowhere close to that. We were still all of us in the red, right? Which is like, it just felt like the train was going off the tracks and burning out. Like there's nothing fueling it anymore, right? And the second you get off the road, like you said, it all dries up, right? So I think it was just a sense of like sort of not desperation, but like exhaustion and like there's no guidance, right? There's no place to go.
Yeah.
So a big question mark in my head, like what the hell are we gonna do? And to get to that next level, whatever that is, to me, just the next level was like just getting our career to the next level where we can actually, like you said, have a sustainable life. There was no
Yeah.
plan for that, right? So I think for me, it was like, okay, I guess we have to just be on the road 11 months of the year, every year to sort of grind out an existence, right? And to me, that I could tell that I wasn't cut out for that. Some people are meant to, like, they love being on the road. That's where they're happiest. I mean, for me, I wanted to have a good balance with my home life, you know, and
Yeah.
so yeah, it was just like a sense of like, what do we do now? And then the world's like, well, guess what? I got a pandemic for you. So it was like it's sort of maybe it was meant to be. I don't know, but it was like a needed break. I felt, you know.
Yeah. Well, it absolutely was, man. And sometimes that kind of forced break is what you need, because I think hard to know how things would have panned out exactly time wise, because it was this time that obviously Hicks left the band, and there again, we'd said this earlier, there was no animosity. Like I think we also talked about this. Like I feel like everybody almost has how much they can deal with in this industry. It's not just whether or not they want to play music anymore, or like, because the first thing, I've been asked, like when Hicks left, was there animosity? It's like, no, there was nothing. Like, it's just at some point you're kind of like, maybe there's other things I want to do more now. And especially when you've given as much as, honestly, as much as Hicks and Granny gave to this band, they gave as much as we did. Like it wasn't,
Oh yeah.
we weren't just steering the ship and they were on for the ride. They ground every day. They were grinding as hard as we were. So, you know, that happened, and Hicks was out. And like you said, it was kind of like, what do we do next? Is there something to do next? And I think like without the pandemic, that might have happened, but probably obviously differently. Um, but we were kind of left with sort of like that weird sort of like, okay, well, Hicks is out. We still don't know when the world's going to come back, or even if it will, because I mean, it's funny talking about the pandemic now, you almost forget just how weird just the not knowing was, because obviously entertainment, music, number one, is like the first thing that ended and the last thing that came back, because anything that had to do with crowds in any way, well, how are you going to do that? Our whole business is based on the notion of trying to get as many people into a room as possible. So, it was a strange time. And honestly, I know it was good for me. I mean, I went to, I was able to pivot into my art more and build, as you kind of have to do. I mean, you've been doing entertainment law now for how many years have you been doing entertainment law, Katie? I feel like you've been working in the van since like 2006.
Yeah, I mean, I became a lawyer in 2010, so yeah, it's been 14 years. But yeah, it's yeah, exactly. Like thankfully, that got busier in the pandemic, which was great. But yeah,
Well, and I bring that up because now that I've got comic art and music, it's like it's hard. What's the right? I'm trying to put this in a way that is like not complaining because it's where we are, but we know so many, like what you would think were full-time musicians that have other jobs, or they have, especially as artists, they're doing all sorts of different things. You know what I mean? They're like they're doing sound stuff when they're not on the road with their band. It's like, that's also kind of a thing where if you want to make a go in the creative world now, your odds of just being in a band and it takes off and now you're buying houses and cars and stuff, it's like that was never going to be easy in the 70s, 80s, or anytime that. But
yeah,
now more than ever, it's kind of like being able to balance a few different things as you're building your career. So luckily, um, with the pandemic, I was able to do that, which is, I think, helped when we started to come back, because you didn't feel like, I think for both of us, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, the nice thing about where we're at right now is because you're not just relying on band income, you can be a little more chill. And I feel like make better decisions and make more healthy decisions, because you're not like, well, you got to say yes to everything all the time, or there's no money coming in. Like that's a crazy amount of pressure that we were under for a really long time.
Yeah, you're totally right, dude. I think there was times where we would take gigs and we're like, we don't want to do this gig, but we kind of need the money, right? And it's like, and not like, we love doing gigs, but it's more like it was just like it's gonna be a pain in the ass. We got to take a bunch of flights to get out to this place, and we all have family stuff commitments that weekend, but we're gonna miss them to make some money, right? And you're right. I think now it's like we do what we want instead of what we have to do,
Yeah.
which is great, yeah. And I think, and then I would say just to jump ahead a second, it's like, yeah, middle of pandemic, we're like, what the hell? And then when we started to kind of like look for a guitar player, and I remember we were like brainstorming, and I was like, I just been following Tara through like Nice Horse and stuff, and I knew she had played with Kitty, and I was like what about her, man? She looks like awesome. And then you and I both had a call with her, and it was just like right away we just vibed, and then
Dude,
cool. Yeah,
honestly, it's cool when you meet somebody that, and honestly, Cooley was like this, and I don't know if anyone knows, but Cooley played actually the last few shows before the pandemic we did with Cooley on bass. We played a few shows in Alberta, and then the pandemic hit, and it was like, oh shit, sorry, dude, we're gonna have to take time off, obviously, but. So it was cool when we came back because Cooley was he was like, yeah, let's go. And then I totally remember that phone call with you when we were just like, what do we do? Do we put the word out? Like, do we post and say like, let's do auditions, or like, what's, we just were like, I love when things are right, they happen so easy and like so casually, because we were just like, well, who do you know that's good and also like a good person, because we didn't want to have to train somebody up on like how to tour, and like it was just, we were like, who's a kick-ass guitar player who also just like has been in bands and knows what the world's like. And you're like, oh yeah, Tara, because you told me about, and I knew she was in Kitty, but I wasn't following any of her other stuff at that point, but then we chatted with her and she was chill. And then weirdly, this is the craziest part. And again, when something's happening right, it's like, oh, this is just meant to be in a way. Because you said you were like, I think she might live in Toronto. But at that point, we're like, well, flying in's not a difficult thing. We're kind of doing it anyway. And so we asked her where she lived, and she's like, oh, I actually live in Calgary right now. And it turned out she lived literally 5-minute walk from my house.
Yeah, that was like, it was meant to be.
Yeah, man. So I met her for coffee and just was like, yeah, she was in, and just, I mean, you know what? We'll probably end this episode here because this is a great part to jump off for the next episode, which is like the new shit EP, why we called it that and all that. But like, just this new era and the joy. It's like, man, this next era, I can't wait to talk about this with you. But it's almost like when joy came back to music for us in a way, because it felt like the grind was over, and Tara and Cooley breathed this new life, but also I felt like you and I were like, for once in our entire career, it felt like we were literally writing and recording for the joy of how much we love music and rock and roll and playing together. And there wasn't that like, oh man, what's the hit? Like, what are we, it didn't have all that heaviness on it that had been put on us before. And it just felt my favorite recording experience ever. I don't know about you.
100%, man. It's like, I felt like, a 20-year-old again, writing music for the first time, right? Like, which I guess in 2004, when we started, I was 23, right? Yeah, 23.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's like, it took me back to that time where it's like, we weren't writing a song to try to like, we'll just go on radio, which that's not how we do it anyways, but there's always that heaviness on our shoulders, right? Whereas in the early days, we just write songs, we'd write a fucking 3-minute intro and then the riff would kick in, it's like, it was kind of back to that sort of just that freedom of being just a musician, right? Which maybe that sounds silly, but like we didn't have that for at least 6-7 years. We didn't have just the freedom of just writing music because we loved it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you know what? Let's end there. And honestly, I'm going to write something down here because you just, man, you really put something together in my mind that I hadn't thought of before. So I'm stoked to talk to you about it next time.
Nice. Okay. Peace.
Thanks for listening to One Bad Podcast.